Hey, hi, folks, we're back. Another week goes by. I hope you guys had a great first day or two of the new year. And we can look forward to an easy month for most of us, writing 2025 on correspondence checks, whatever the case may be, until we can get hooked into this 2026. Frankly, 2026, I mean, that sounds like we ought to have flying cars or something. I'm sorry. I had hoped that by the time we reached this, maybe it's too many comic books, but that we would have really a lot more really cool kind of futuristic things. Not that we don't. I mean, especially with this AI thing coming out, it's pretty amazing, and going to follow on the heels of that is probably robotics. So, yeah, we got a little bit, but I need a flying car, or at least a motorcycle. Something. Skateboard. I need some of that. I need to dress in like these shiny silver suits that we used to see, and like if you went back and watched all the old movies, about the future, that sort of these zip up sort of kind of Reynolds wrap looking clothing. Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. Don't see any of that. So we got a ways to go yet. And that's one of the things I do like about Elon Musk. He says that the future should look like the future. He thinks that when you design things for the future, that they should look forward. In other words, look at something new. Doesn't mean you're going to hit all the time in terms of styling, but you're trying. We saw this in like 1963. The early 60s, as I've mentioned before, as a car person, and that reflects a lot of it, but a lot of things, if you go back and look at that styling, and I noticed it when I was looking at car models and that kind of thing, when I like old cars, and I like new cars, and pretty much anything that moves. But anyway, they were so optimistic about the future. Remember, talk about how they looked like rockets. I mean, there was even a Rocket 88. The 63 T-Birds that I always talk about, because I want a 63 T-Bird convertible because I think it looks so neat. The taillights looked like rockets. The side profile looked like one. Many things were styled that way. There was a very futuristic feel. We were looking towards space. I mean, we were a little concerned about the Sputnik thing, but that actually got us off our rear ends and got us going in things. And the 70s came along. Things, I don't know what happened there. It was just confusing. I mean, you could figure the 60s out a little better with hippies and this and that, just kind of spoiled kids, didn't know what to do with themselves. Instead of, getting down a job, they, backpack around Europe or something. But by the 70s, I thought was a confusing time period when you look back on it. Music was it was a little odd. I mean, it was rhythmic. That's about it. But then by the time you get to the 80s, we start picking up steam with Reagan and so forth, and then we run into the 90s, which are a confusing time. I don't know. I don't think the 90s has a personality. People keep trying to give it one. It just doesn't seem to stick. There's two or three things you can show somebody, and they go, oh, that's from the 80s. And something else, oh, that's from the 70s. And I'm talking about people who weren't born until the 80s. I can still identify stuff like that from TV and just popular knowledge. But when you go to like the 90s, it's pretty hard to have like sort of icons that someone's going to identify. Anyway, what I want to talk about this first segment is, hey, we got a mayor in New York now, Mondani. Ooh, the Zoran. That's going to be interesting. And I thought we'd take a couple looks at that because I think it's important. And one is just the political side. And the economic side we'll talk about in a minute because it's fascinating. And really, the whole thing's fascinating. When people talk about, it's like watching a train wreck, you can't look away. This is exactly what they're talking about. This is a train wreck in real time, and it's hard not to look at it. And you would think, because you see what's coming, because, you've read a book or two in your life, that other people would say, oh, we need to correct this course. Well, that's not going to happen. It's just going to blame other people. Well, this didn't work because we didn't have enough money, because the rich didn't give us enough. We didn't have enough power. People were, doing different things than we told them to do. We didn't have enough support from the federal government. I mean, it'll never be the ideological problem. There'll be no readjustment there. There'll just be firming up of it. It just wasn't pushed hard enough. And by the way, we don't just have Mondami in New York. We have a really funny progressive mayor that got elected in Seattle, whose name I can't recall right now and don't want to because I just don't. I don't see the point. But you can look. Seattle has just elected a mayor. And like I said, I can't remember her name exactly, so I don't want to mess it up. But she's never had a job. Now, Mamdani really has never had a job either. But this woman in Seattle has really never had a job. And I think she was living with her parents or something. I mean, the fact that she became mayor at all is wild. I mean, it's more interesting than even Mamdani. Mamdani, if you watch him, you kind of get it. I mean, you think people are crazy for voting for him for this stuff, but when you take your knowledge of what's going to happen away, you get it. The woman in Seattle, it's like, what? I mean, did 6 people vote and all of them were on medical marijuana? I mean, what happened there? That's really kind of the more interesting one. That city is going to take a hammering. Portland was actually a little worse than Seattle, if you can imagine. And Seattle had made a few efforts under this last administration to clean up a little bit. And I mean really small efforts. They actually sent the police out a couple of times. They stopped hating them directly, just, hating them behind closed doors. And so a little bit was done. Well, that's going to all disappear. Yeah. Seattle is going to head towards the Portland 6 months ago, before the guard went in there. They're going to head towards that Portland model at breakneck speed and probably go past it. So that's happening on the other coast. What's the lesson in this? Apparently, don't move to the coast. That seems to be the lesson I'm getting out of this. There's a few cities along the coast that are probably okay in the southeast, but, just as a rule of thumb, stay away from the ocean. It apparently does something to your thinking. But let's go back to New York for a second. For those of you that did get a chance to watch his inauguration speech, if you see a video of it someplace, and like I said, don't hesitate, folks, to get on the internet and look at YouTube and find these kinds of things, because they're educational. And like I said, it's a political train wreck. So you don't get often get this opportunity to see these things just sort of happen right in front of you. And I don't think it's going to be a very long time before things start happening. I mean, right away in New York, they had this big party for his election, right? And all the voters, got together, and then it turned out he didn't have any food or anything like that for them. They just had a party where there was no treats, no snacks. Boy, they didn't like that. I mean, Bernie Sanders and AOC were there. You would think that, they would have realized people should have had some potato chips or something, but no. So that right off the bat kind of shows you the planning that goes into this. But don't count somebody like Mamdani out. If you go back and watch his speech, he's a dangerous politician. I mean, AOC is a little bit, but she gets a little too wild-eyed, and I think that peels some of the support off. He can speak. He's a better speaker than Obama. Of course, as I've said before, so was Bill Clinton. So were 2 or 3 other people. Obviously, Reagan. There are a lot of people better speakers than Barack. He was okay, but try and think of one memorable thing that he said. Yes, I know. I mean, if there is something, it's negative. But Mamdani, he knows his audience. He knows what to say, and I think he actually believes it at this point, I think, which makes him a little more believable to his audience. I mean, he went through his speech and mentioned each place within New York City, at least those boroughs. He didn't get into Far Rockaway or talk about Long Island or anything off his map. All on his map, talked about each of the areas, the ethnic neighborhoods, and so forth. And it was done in a way to make sure, I'm in touch. I'm just not. I thought it was really pretty clever. You have to give the devil his due. So you got to watch people like that, because they can get in a situation where they can be a senator before you know it. That would be interesting. Be worse than Chuck Schumer, probably. We'll be back. It isn't New York that we have to worry about. It's every place else. These ideas are latched onto by nimrods in every jurisdiction. I don't care if you're talking about a town council of a city of, a town of 600 people. There's a couple in there that'll see some of these ideas and go, we should do that here. Why? We'll never really know how these people think. The fact that there's absolutely no familiarity or similarities between New York and where they're at doesn't seem to make any difference. The fact that it fails miserably every place else doesn't make any difference. So, but they're there. So they're around you. Don't think they're not. They're there. Used to be that they kind of congregated in one spot, but now they've sort of spread out. A lot of times because they've ruined where they were at, and they've got to move on and ruin some other place. They don't understand that the problem is not what they move away from. It's them moving to these problems because they create them. Anyway, we need to understand sort of fiscal ideas that take place in cities, counties, states, and the nation. But they're a little different in states, counties, and cities because they can't print money. They'd like to. I'm telling you what, it's just a matter of time until California decides they're going to print some kind of script. Remember, we had that happen before in this country, that probably had a problem with states kind of issue their own money. And I don't just mean the Confederacy. I'm telling you right now, if Newsom could figure out a way to engineer that so that he could somehow prop his economy up for a year by pretending that little pieces of paper that they print have monetary value, he'd do it. Because when it comes to the money that, I mean, it's all electronic now, but it's still pretty much, greenbacks, as we would say. They're just moving electronically across, sort of like an amazingly huge flock of geese going through the internet. But he'd do it. Anyway, so you got to realize that you got to keep your eye on things. And things go from macrocosm to microcosm. That means it can happen in New York City. It can also happen in Grand Junction, where I'm at. Well, it's already happening here. But, yeah, so it's just diminished in terms of scope, but not in reach. So it's good that way you can ask the right questions, right? I mean, let's start with the basics a little bit. Now, you look at New York's budget, and it's $120 billion a year for that city. But it's not in a surplus. Isn't that surprising? As a matter of fact, it's running a structural deficit. And legacy costs like pensions and retirees' health care are piling up. Now, we have this socialist progressive agenda proposes billions more in recurring programs. How are they going to fund that? Well, of course, the same old way they always do, or think they can. Higher taxes on the city's wealthiest, the top 5%, who already pay about 42% of New York City's personal income taxes. That's right, 42% of the city's personal income tax is paid by the top 5% of the population in terms of earners. That's a really narrow base. And the plan assumes that they'll stay put and just keep paying. That's kind of a big assumption, right? Now you have to look a little bit more at historical precedent. I mean, not from think tanks and so forth, but, real world stuff. Go back and look at San Francisco. We're just talking a few years ago when they started this, really doubling down on it. Progressive policies, huge spending. What were the outcomes? Businesses left, residents left, homelessness skyrocketed. Despite a record amount of spending on homelessness and these programs, it went way up, and people went away from what they thought was a great city. It's a pretty city. I mean, if you don't look at the streets now. And it was close to where a lot of these people worked, which still matters. But they left anyway. And there's our old friend Detroit, who from like probably the 70s, late 70s until the 2000s, now they've sort of flattened out. But they had, the unions just kept hammering away at the automakers. Not to say that they're not, greedy themselves, but nevertheless, it ended up having what was essentially redistributive policies. And what happened? Eventually you get municipal bankruptcy and a mass population flight. There was a while, and I haven't checked it recently, where Detroit had a smaller population than it did in the 1920s. That's sort of dystopian, isn't it? That's sort of like something, you see on one of these futuristic TV programs, like, the city's dying out there, the zombies are underground. Not too far from that. Chicago's on the same path. Their pensions, their tax structures, their spending, they are deteriorating at a fiscal rate that's running even some corporations off Chicago. That pattern's clear. When you expand social programs without economic diversification and an increase in production, first you get stagnation, then you get an unstable and non-sustainable environment. That's just it. That's just the numbers. So let's look back at New York, because I went through and I looked at these numbers, and based on the projections on both sides here about what want to do versus what realistically what they're going to collect. And this is running it with a somewhat optimistic outlook. Within 3 years, year one, this is what I figured out by looking at it. Revenue increases to about $118 billion. Remember, their budget was $120. So it shows you that this just closes the gap maybe a little bit if these things get voted in, but still leaves a deficit. But luckily, it's a bigger deficit than before. If you look at how much spending they plan on doing with these programs, their spending is going to be $124 billion. That's $6 billion in deficit. If you curve that out to year three, and by then, revenue may, if things kind of go better than I'm certain they're going to go, revenue might be $124 billion, but by then, the spending curve hits $136 billion. That's a $12.7 billion deficit. And that's with a tax base that's eroding, which is probably eroding faster than our optimistic projections. They're probably going to lose. This is just a projection. If you even dial down what people are saying, about every year probably lose about 1% to 4% of the top earners if they just keep piling it on them. It's not a gap. It's a canyon. People are always saying in these places, by the way, that, well, there's a lot more to it than just taxes. People stay because of opportunities, lifestyle, so on and so forth. And there's some truth to that. You can charge people a lot more, even if they don't want to, if there's still things they like that they can't get other places. Like, for instance, you can charge more if you get more homelessness and more drug usage and more assaults on people in the subway. No, wait. That's not something you can charge more for. So I don't think that really holds. A path like this punishes capital formation. It doesn't encourage it. It doesn't have any incentives built into it to increase. It detaches consumption from production. Can't do that. I'm telling you. You guys know that. It's simple. If you spend more than you make, that's a problem. If you eat more than you have, then that means that tomorrow you've got even less. I mean, I didn't put that right, but you know what I'm trying to say. Some people say the rich won't leave, but behavior isn't static. If you push them hard enough, even an incremental migration tips a system in a place that relies so heavily on a few big taxpayers. Just a few thousand of these high-income earners moving or deferring income to someplace else, it could devastate their fiscal balance. We don't even know for sure what that's going to look like, but there's no scenario where it looks like it's going to be better. Unless, of course, you live in the mayor's mansion with a guy who's never had a job, who is really pretty radical in his thinking, and he's got a degree. It isn't a degree that anything that anyone would pay you for. So you have to run for office. This is the thing that happens in America. When you don't have anything that people are interested in terms of a business or some idea you might have, then a percentage of those people run for office. And because the electorate doesn't pay a lot of attention, a percentage of those people get elected. And then we look and we wonder why it looks like our legislators speak, act, and spend like drunken parrots. Well, we let them. I mean, once again, it just takes one bunch. You take half out of that bunch and then half out of the next bunch. And if, 25% of those people actually make it into office, that's a lot of idiots. And anybody that's worked around a few idiots realize that just a few make a big problem. And we've got more than a few working in government. So, the question is, whether these social goals sound great, universal health care, whatever else they come up with, it's whether the math works. History and all of this and works against it. The math doesn't work. You can't beat capitalism. It's not perfect, but you sure can't beat it with this. So I like these segments to be called something. I think it's sort of like attention reallocation. Because, as I say all the time, we live in a world of news media that finds three things and talks about them endlessly until another thing or two comes up and they talk about them. The world's a little more complicated than that. And it's not like you can't understand it. It's just that it's easier for them. Sometimes you've got to pay attention to other things. You people are smart enough to know that everything sort of interlocks. That everything from what the weather is in your area to what's going on with bombers flying from Russia over Alaska, everything sort of has a rippling effect. And being on the informed end of that, even if you're not at the policy-making level, is always something to have in your back pocket because it helps you think about things. And by the way, you are at the policy-making level. You vote for these people who put these plans in place, who's supposed to tactically engineer things to keep you safe, to keep the economy rolling along. So you really are in the picture. Even if you're in a small town in the mountains, you're still voting. At least I hope you are. If you're not, you're sort of voting too. You're sort of, voting by default. You're letting other people vote for you. So while your vote doesn't exactly end up in the register, it is affected by the fact that it's absent. Anyway, so I thought we'd look about what was going on in the world here at the end of the year. That I was surprised that, I'm not surprised. Here's a little something that I know people heard about, but then it just kind of disappeared. Taiwan again. China, just in the last week of December, they ran major military exercises around Taiwan. They ran things to simulate blockades, air-sea control, deterrence of outside forces. In other words, a way to keep other people from coming and helping. And the People's Liberation Army conducted 274 sorties into Taiwan's airspace in December. They're not fooling around. Some of that is intimidation, some of that is recon, and some of that is just to check response. None of it is a good thing for Taiwan. A blockade rehearsal is strategically different from just symbolic flybys, rattle of the saber, that kind of stuff. It's sort of deniable coercion. You claim you're training for something while you test timings, your coordination, the political will of the people you're imposing it on, and you're showing what you can do. And they've been showing Taiwan. Now, some of our talking heads in the United States say, well, China has economic problems. Yeah, it does. But it doesn't behave with them like us. We've talked about that before. Historically, particularly ever since Mao decided to change the country in 1949, they behave a little bit differently. We tend to assume that when we're in economic problems, we tend to compromise, that we look for ways to bail ourselves out internally. China often treats economic strain as a reason to tighten control and then externalize things. It's sort of the wag the dog thing on the Chinese scale. When things start getting problems at home, you decide to exercise yourself externally. And it does work. And it has worked in the past for them. And what we're seeing lines up with Beijing leaning harder into like a state-led production and export less consumer rebound, more of a strategic industry. Their domestic demand is weak, and deflation is kind of going on in their economy, which is never a good thing. It's in some ways as bad, or depending on where you're at, it can be even worse than inflation. So when that kind of model runs hot, we get all this international friction, right? Tariffs, export control, shipping, insurance goes up. all this military signaling. So things start tightening up, and we start feeling it. And you know where you can feel it is when you go to the store. I had a couple of people talking to me about how just going to Walmart seemed different. There weren't as many really inexpensive things. They're still there. But as a percentage of the inventory, there's less. That has to do a lot with our tariff situation with China. That's fine. But we got pretty used to having some things that were remarkably cheap. Some of the clothing we had, t-shirts, things like that, and they're still pretty darn cheap, considering. If you go back and look at what people were paying for those kinds of items in the 60s, adjusted for inflation, we pay less for them. That's because we've sent them overseas to be made more cheaply. Not necessarily quality-wise, although that is sometimes the case, but in terms of production value, or rather production cost. When we tighten up a little bit on our tariffs, we start seeing it at the low end. It's not like we are deciding to put a wealth tax on new Mercedes from Germany and things like that, like Clinton tried. We're putting tariffs on things, and those things are going to go up. And there's only so much that the retailers can absorb that. Is it necessary? Yeah, probably. China has beaten us up for a long time on the international trade situation. And we've let it happen. As a matter of fact, we've facilitated it. It doesn't mean that we can bring every single industry back to the United States. It'd be nice. But some of them are just too expensive to bring back right now, at least. But we can sort of move them or encourage movement to places that don't hate us as bad as China and don't want to displace us as a leader in the world. China just does it, and they pretty much say it. I'm looking at some of my notes here. If you look at this Taiwan risk premium, don't forget about chips. People expect 2026 to be kind of a muddle-through year. Oh, we have this blockade-style rehearsal, elevated sorties, shipping disruption. Even without war, it's going to cause inventory problems and spikes in insurance. That'll make things more expensive, even if nothing situationally happens. If you take what's going on and project it out a little bit, you get, you get sort of a better than 50% chance, maybe 60% chance that it's not going to have a blockade, but there's going to be even heightened tension. Growth is going to slow more in China. They're going to look externally more to distract their population. That can lead to a lot of adventurism on their part. It's happened in the past. If it gets more stressed, we're going to start seeing more maritime, disruption, aircraft incursions, sanctions, some kind of controls. A lot of these things will hit Europe as well as us if they do that. It hurts them, but they're trying to do something. They're trying to externalize it. Especially with what we have going on like in Europe. China looks at that and says, look, these guys are pretty distracted. And maybe we can get ourselves in the driver's seat a little bit more because they're not paying attention. They're looking into the Ukraine, for instance, right? And Europe's growth is even more fragile than what's going on in China. I mean, it's carrying, what it's trying to do is increase defense spending. It has some real industrial softness, too. It's been exporting industrial production out of that country for a while, a long time. And their energy production is even worse than ours. They've decided that windmills are a better way to do it than gas-powered plants, and they're paying a price for that. Their energy costs are ridiculous. It makes manufacturing too high to do there, and that's what makes that industrial softness. I mean, and it's going to hit Europe because of their overreach on green energy, which is hard to imagine since we've done such a lousy job of doing the same thing. They're even worse, but it's going to hit them worse. So if you see something like the Taiwan Strait clamping down, it's going to have an effect on them because a lot of components that not just they use in country, but countries that they get other things from use those components. So if you're buying something that's made in, let's just say, Thailand, but a lot of the components that are assembled in Thailand are made in China, and if you're Germany and you're buying things made in Thailand that they're component-wise are coming from China, things are going to get affected, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening with global trade. It's no longer a straight binary situation anymore. There's a lot of places that feed into other things. And yeah, let's say we'll do 80% of our production here. Yeah, but 20% of what's really critical we get someplace else. You see a lot of that. What happens in the Ukraine is going to have a lot to do with what our economic and geopolitical situation looks like in the next couple of years. President Trump likes to talk about the fact that if he'd been in office when Biden was in office, the Ukraine war probably wouldn't have started. I mean, that sounds like a lot of puffery, but it's probably true. If you look back at the way Putin has behaved, when he sees weak leadership in the United States, that's when he moves. He's not stupid. Far from it. And you know why. Look what he did with Crimea, that region, when Obama was in office. We did nothing. I mean, it wasn't even that newsworthy because nobody wanted to criticize Obama's foreign policy. And by the way, his foreign policy was to apologize at everything we've done in the past and do nothing right in the future. That's pretty much it. When those moves were made, same thing with Biden was president. So yeah, there's an argument to be made that weak leadership in the United States leads to aggression from really everybody, but the Russians especially watch it because they see Europe and the European nations, NATO, European Union, as pretty stuck in a vortex of doom. Yeah, I think that might be it. They have immigration problems in these countries that is disrupting their economy, disrupting their politics, and everything else. And their answer to it has been to do more of it. Angela Merkel has done more to hurt Germany than anybody in the last 40 years. And she's gone now, but the effects of her opening the borders are still there. So Europe is one of our trading partners, and they're having a real problem. China can influence that. Russia can continue to influence that. Look, we've talked about before, Russia's going to continue to act in a bellicose way that's going to encourage, and it should, more defense spending from the European countries. It's going to reallocate some of their resources. And like we said, their resources are having a problem now because they've factored a lot of those out of their own country. They got to get back in the business of making weapons, production, logistics, all that kind of stuff. And they haven't worried about it since, I don't know, 1946 probably. And now it's a problem. So we'll see how fast they can get going. The faster Europe can get its military up to speed, bring some of its essential industries back, or at least get better control of them, it will be better for the United States. We can't keep running the war in Ukraine. We just can't keep pouring money into it forever. This is a grind. And the reason Putin doesn't come to the table is because he thinks he's winning. And over a long enough trajectory, he probably is. Maybe not, but I mean, it looks that way, right? I mean, what did I write down here? I tried to sow. Yeah. If you look at the Ukraine, what it would cost to rebuild it right now. And Europe talks about, oh, yeah, after the war, we're going to help build Ukraine. Right. Okay. Putin's already asked for an expansion of the buffer zone during peace talks, assume that ever really happens, for 2026. And Kiev, sorry, I'm starting to sound like these other people. It's Kiev. Just says that, well, we're not ready to give everything up. give everything up, you've already can't hold on to certain things. You've done a tremendous job of defense. No question about it. They've been extraordinarily brave and tough. But there is a reality to this when it comes to size and time. And the stubbornness of the Russians and their willingness to take casualties over long periods of time. We've seen that again and again in Russian history. They've been in a lot of wars where sometimes it's just been a stalemate. Sometimes they've kind of won. But if you look at what it cost them, it's kind of a hard thing to swallow. But they're willing to do that. It's part of their long-term military culture. And something that could make us a little happy is that Russia has proven again and again that as an expeditionary force, it's not very good. I mean, its finest performance was defending Russia itself and then pushing that line of defense towards Germany. That's not really an expeditionary force. That's just moving your internal defenses outward a little bit at a time. Going out and just attacking somebody else does not seem to work exceptionally well for the Russians, even when they had more capabilities. But they still have a lot of people, they still have a lot of weapons, and they still have a lot of productive capability. And they're always able to find somebody to buy their natural gas and petroleum reserves. We no longer can control that. We try, we have sanctions, we this and that. People who aren't friendly to us, or people that are friendly to us but don't care what we think about them, continue to buy it if it's cheap enough. That fuels a war machine. And if you're talking about, okay, everything gets done, right? Now we're going to go rebuild Ukraine. Let's say we stop tomorrow. The World Bank, and this is just a guesstimate on their part, sort of like if you had a Marshall Plan or something there, said that it would probably take about $524 billion over the next decade. That's, 2.8 times Ukraine's estimated GDP that they had in 2024. So they're not going to be able to do it. They're going to have money from other people. Fine, if you want to do that. Just be aware of how much it's going to cost. And it's very real. We talk about this all the time. You know, that, we're going to build them back, we're going to do this and that. That's fine, but you better look at how much you're going to spend. And what do we get out of it? This is what people are saying, well, Trump is, the rare earths. I mean, he's holding them up. Holding them up. We're pouring essentially the gross domestic product of a small nation into that place every few months, or have been. We've cut back on it a little bit now. That's just not something you do because you're friendly. You got to get something out of it. Either it's protection, which it sort of is. I mean, we know that if Europe has a problem with Russia, that we're going to have a problem eventually. So keeping them hemmed in is probably the best idea. The best thing to do, it's a little bit like doing with Mandami in New York, where Trump is said, he's, a bad guy and this and that. Yeah, don't demonize the guy so that he can use that as an excuse for his failure. Isolate him. Turn him loose. Let him sit in there. Let him stew in his own juices. And let that be the way. You don't need to attack him. He's going to attack himself. Same thing here. The more we can contain the Russians, the more difficult it is for them. They don't have a great economy. They have a few things that they sell, but it's not great. Putin has been trying to get back the old Soviet Union's more profitable areas, and Ukraine was one of them. I'm sure he'd like to have East Germany back. Part of Poland, certainly Hungary, places that actually produced a lot for the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union couldn't produce anything for itself. Its economy was so screwed up that it survived by draining off of the Eastern Bloc nations, having them sell things at below production costs or very much near production costs, and keeping their economy afloat by essentially siphoning productivity off of the Eastern Bloc nations. If he got them back, that's exactly what would happen again, because they're not going to change their model because it would require a change in government at the top, and there's not much interest in that there now. And the last time we really had a change in the Soviet Union that became Russia was, under Yeltsin and so forth, and that was just because the economy was collapsing. Couldn't keep up. That was Reagan. He saw that that's how that you would bring them down, and he was right. Isolate them. Let them stay in their own spot, and eventually will all tumble down. Without expansion and getting resources from others, that system can't work. It's the same thing in New York City. It's exactly the same. That system cannot work because the system won't work. But you can pretend it works by having somebody else fund it. Same thing. They don't have the Eastern Bloc nations like the Soviet Union did, but they hope the federal government will come bail them out. Don't kid yourself. Some of those people in that Mondami administration know that very well. They just figured it'll happen. And they know if things go badly, they'll just scream about Donald Trump, and it won't look like they're having a problem at all. So that's the state of the world right now. And if we had a doomsday clock like the, sort of liberal scientists had, where we were, like 50 seconds to midnight, the doomsday clock. Well, you get this feeling when you look around the world. Take your eyes off the conventional media forms, left and right, that just talk about the same thing all the time. Things are changing. Keeping our eye on them should help you make decisions about who you put in positions of power and how you can respond and what you can do for yourself to prepare. We'll be back.